Too often, organizations treat digital transformations like a gamble. They're taking big risks without much of a payoff. What is it we need to know about transformation gambling? That's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. One of the things we've learned and witnessed over the years is that organizations treat their transformation projects a lot like gambling in Vegas, which is where I'm at here today. They're in Las Vegas, they're doubling down, making these big bets and losing a lot of money, much like many people do in Las Vegas. However, it doesn't need to be that way. There's a lot of things that we're doing as organizations that are big gambles without much of a payoff, but it doesn't need to be that way. We can change that. So what I want to do today is talk about the way digital transformations are often like gambling and what we can do to overcome those risks. Now, for more digital transformation best practices, I encourage you to read my new book called The Final Countdown. It's a book that I published to talk about digital strategy and the things you need to do to get ready to be successful in your digital transformation. You can find that by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or you can just go to thefinalcountdown.com to order that book. So one disclaimer here is that I actually hate gambling. Even though I gamble in business and I've started multiple companies and I take gambles every day in business, I do not like gambling in casinos. So I just need to put that caveat out there as part of this video. Now, oftentimes when people are gambling, there's a concept called beginner's luck. It's a theory that suggests that sometimes beginners have better luck than someone who's been gambling for a long time. And oftentimes organizations treat their digital transformations in that same way. They're beginners, they're novices, they're amateurs in digital transformations, and they don't know what they don't know. So what ends up happening oftentimes too is that they end up making bad decisions or ineffective decisions because they don't know any better. So what is it you can do about this to avoid this sort of reliance on beginner's luck? Well, one thing you can do is ensure that you have outside advice that is meant to help you through the transformation process, and hire outside experts that do this for a living and can augment your team's knowledge of your own business, your own strategies, and your own culture, and augment that internal knowledge and that tribal knowledge with that outside expertise. Now, if you're worried about this whole concept of beginner's luck, one thing you can do is go to our website, go to thirdstage-consulting.com. And if you go to the Resource Center, there's a ton of resources there that will help you learn more about digital transformation. And it's really meant to be a way to educate you so you're not relying on beginner's luck. So you want to make sure that you're not dependent solely on beginner's luck and that you're actually augmenting your team with people that can take you well beyond that concept of beginner's luck. Another very risky gamble that organizations make during their digital transformation is they don't have proper planning for their digital transformation project. In other words, they just rush and jump into starting to deploy stuff, deploying new technologies. They start building stuff without a clear plan of how they're going to accomplish their goals, what their goals are to begin with, how they're going to resource the project, what they want their business processes to look like, what they want their organization and their operating model to look like. This future state definition and clarity is something that's really important as part of the planning process so that you're not dependent on dumb luck to be successful in your project. You want to know that you've got a realistic plan that aligns with who you are as an organization today and where you're headed in the future. Now, one thing you can do to overcome this failure to plan that a lot of organizations have in their digital transformations, there's two resources that'll help you overcome this. One is the Digital Transformation Report. It's an annual report that you can download that has a lot of best practices for making digital transformation successful. That's one thing. You can scan the QR code in front of you or go to the links below. Another thing you can do is download the Phase Zero checklist. It's basically a checklist for everything that you need to do prior to starting your digital transformation as part of your planning process. So these are two resources that are meant to help you through that process. So one of the biggest things you can do to mitigate risk and to make sure that you don't go bust on your digital transformation project is to ensure you spend enough time up front being effective in defining a clear and aligned strategy and plan for your overall digital transformation. Another high-risk endeavor that organizations take, much like gambling, is that they double down on technology. And it's not only that they're doubling down on technology, but oftentimes they're doubling down on technology that's wasted. It's shelfware. It's not delivering business value to the organization, and it's costing a lot more time and money than it should. Just as is the case in Las Vegas or any sort of gambling environment, people will oftentimes double down when they think they've got a good hand, and they'll double down hoping that they get a bigger payout. Unfortunately, just like in gambling, it usually doesn't work. And at the end of the day, the house usually wins, which I'm going to come back to that point here in a moment. But the key thing here is that we want to make sure that we're not doubling down on technology that's not delivering business value to our organization. So we want to be very selective and strategic with how we use technology. Now, software vendors will try to get you to buy and consume more than you can possibly digest as an organization, but that doesn't mean you should necessarily go that direction. You shouldn't necessarily double down. You should really only double down on those things that are really going to deliver business value. And so maybe you do end up spending a significant amount on your technology implementation, but you do so in a way that's very focused on the technologies that are going to deliver the most business value.
Now, one thing to note about technology and this whole concept of doubling down on technology is that technology is changing so much faster than your organization is probably capable of. And that's okay, that's not a bad thing. But what you want to do is make sure you resist that temptation to bite off more than you can chew, go buy every bell and whistle you possibly can, and invest in technologies that you're just not able to consume. So it's okay if you need to ease into some of these new emerging technologies that you hear about on this channel.
So make sure that you're smart about how and when or if you double down on technology, and make sure you're not wasting a lot of time and money on technology that's not going to work for you. Now, one of the biggest and baddest and riskiest decisions that organizations make during their digital transformation is that they roll the dice at the time of go live. In other words, they're counting on luck. They're counting on low odds to deliver success to their organizations and to their overall transformation. And this is the last thing you should be doing. You should be very confident at the time you're going to go live that go live is going to be successful. And at the very least, you want to know that it's not going to disrupt your operations. I had a client once many years ago, one of the first digital transformation and ERP implementations that I led. And I remember the CEO deciding that he was going to go live even though we weren't ready. There's a lot of customization that the organization chose to do that still hadn't been tested. User acceptance testing wasn't completed and training wasn't completed, but he was tired of spending money on the project, so he decided to go live with the project anyway. And this is where I came up with this whole idea of this Hail Mary concept of a go live, where we're just going to flip the switch on the new technology and assume that we're going to get the business value we expect, or at the very least, we're not going to disrupt our operations. However, the harsh reality is that most digital transformations cause some sort of operational disruption, material operational disruption at the time of go live, and you need to plan for that. And if you go in with your eyes wide open and understand what those risks are and mitigate those risks, you're much less likely to roll the dice at the time of go live.
Now, one thing the more successful organizations do to avoid this phenomena of rolling the dice is to make sure that they have a go, no-go checklist. So make sure that you have a proper milestone to go through and make sure that you've gone through and identified and quantified where the risks are, and make sure your executive team is on board with understanding what those risks are and what the trade-offs are. Because there's a risk to delaying a project, but there's also a risk to not delaying a project if you haven't adequately addressed some of the underlying issues that might be apparent within your transformation.
So the one thing you should do is follow the other steps I'm mentioning here in this video, because that ultimately will help make sure that you're mitigating risk and that you're not throwing a Hail Mary at the time of go live, and you're not just rolling the dice and hoping for the best. One of the biggest ways that gamblers get into trouble is that they keep gambling and they keep trying to win back their money. In other words, they spend bad money after good. And that's a lot like how digital transformations are often run. There's a lot of reckless spending, a lot of misallocation of resources, a lot of focus on low value activities. And in some cases, there's a focus on activities that are actually undermining value altogether. And so much like gambling, you need to know when to tap out. You need to know when to stop. You need to know when to redirect or to throttle back your spending. You need to know when to take control of your project and get better parameters and controls in place. All those things are really important from a project governance perspective. And oftentimes what happens is software vendors and system implementers will come into an organization with an unrealistic time frame, budget, and resource allocation. And the organization, not knowing any better, will base their entire budget and plan around that unrealistic set of expectations. And they oftentimes don't know when to adjust or when to correct those unrealistic expectations. Ideally, you don't ever start with unrealistic expectations. You want to start with a dose of reality from the very beginning. But if you find yourself getting off track, or you find yourself heading down the path of potential disaster, you want to make sure you know when to tap out, when to redirect and reset the project and recast the project plan if need be.
Now, taking this whole concept of tapping out one step further, it's important to think about the cost that you've invested in the project as a sunk cost. And a lot of times organizations will spend X amount of money and X amount of time on a project and think that they can't go back. They can't turn back, they can't cancel the project, they can't stop the project. And the good news is you can stop the project, you can pause it, even if it's just temporarily. And you have to really look at everything you've spent and everything you've done as a sunk cost. You can't change that, but you can change the path forward. And so that's really the key here, is to look at things in the past as a sunk cost and look to the future as a way to improve and optimize your strategy going forward.
So make sure you take control of the project. Make sure you take sort of an agile approach to pivot when necessary throughout your implementation. And if things get bad enough, yes, you may need to cancel the project or at least pause the project until you can regroup and figure out what the best path forward is. Now, if you've ever been to Las Vegas or you've ever been gambling, you probably know that the house always wins. In other words, these casinos that you see behind me, they're making a lot of money off people losing money. And so the statistics are that the average person is going to lose more often than they win. So the odds are stacked against you from the moment you set foot into Vegas or any sort of casino. So unfortunately, organizations run their projects in the same way. Based on statistics and the failure rates of digital transformations in the space, it's also true that organizations are losing to the house, so to speak. And it doesn't need to be that way. The good thing with digital transformations, unlike gambling, is you can tilt the statistics and the odds into your favor, and there's no reason that you should be settling for this concept of the house always winning. You can actually create a level playing field and an environment where you can actually succeed and deliver business value, mitigate risk, and avoid some of the pitfalls that I've talked about throughout this video and that I commonly talk about throughout my YouTube channel. So the key here is to really recognize that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a train wreck. It doesn't have to be a situation where you're going through a digital transformation only to spend twice as much money as you expected or to take 3 times as long as you expected to deploy the technology, only to find that you're still not getting the business value you expected out of the technology. It doesn't need to be that way, shouldn't be that way. So don't treat your digital transformation as sort of a given that the house is always going to win. You want to make sure that you treat your digital transformation as something that can and should and will deliver success and business value to your organization. So I hope this has provided you some guidance on how to avoid some of the bad luck that gamblers experience and gamblers within organizations often experience when they're going through digital transformations. For more best practices and lessons and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to read my new book called The Final Countdown. You can read that by scanning the QR code in front of you, or you can just go to thefinalcountdown.com to learn more about the book and to order it, and I hope you enjoy that book too. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day. It's so funny. People are like stopping and turning around to see what you're filming. Like they're looking up there like, now just as is the case, is that right? That's very close. I thought I knew that dude. I was staring at him and then he's looking at me weird. Is that they, what's the word?
Rolling the dice.
Rolling the dice. Thank you.